Well, as Washington confronts Beijing on trade, it's the other Washington that bears the brunt. Washington state is America's Pacific Northwest, may have the most to lose when it comes to a trade war. CGTN's Guan sat down with Washington state's Commerce Director Brian Bonlender to find out why.
We are probably the most trade-dependent state in the United States. We're the third largest port in North America, and China is our biggest trading partner, and Washington State is China's largest trading partner amongst U.S. states. And so when we look at the prospects of a potential trade war, that becomes very concerning to us. We've seen estimates upwards of 30 to 40% of all jobs in the state are dependent, at least in part, on trade. So a general trade war could be really catastrophic to our economy here.
Specifically, you talk about the impact to your economy. In what ways?
Those retaliatory tariffs have impacted some agriculture products in Washington state, cherries and apples, but also the tariffs that our own government imposed on aluminum and steel. That's impactful to industries in Washington state, most notably the aerospace industry. 25% of the 737s in particular, all of which are manufactured in Washington state, those could be impacted because Chinese buyers could go to Airbus instead of Boeing.
What would be your message to the other Washington who has been very keen on having this tariff, trade conflict, trade war, whatever you call it, with China and other countries?
The Trump administration is bringing up some valid issues that have been brought up by previous administrations with respect to trade practices with China, and in particular, the lack of enforcement of intellectual property. That's something that I'm hopeful that the Chinese government is able to better enforce. I think it's in the interest of China long term to be an innovator country. But that all said, I am very concerned about a scattershot approach from the U.S. administration without any really long-term underlying strategy.
Argument President Trump often used was, China is beating the U.S. in trade. If you look at the hundreds of billions of deficit with China, the American workers are losing out. How do you look at that argument?
Well, those numbers do not include services, and a lot of those numbers do not reflect the add-on components. Supply chains are so integrated for so many industries, whether it's an automobile or an iPhone. Oftentimes, a lot of the components of, so say for an iPhone, the chips are often manufactured in the United States. They tend to be the highest value product. But when the phone is shipped over to the States that's assembled in China, all the value would be accrued to the Chinese business that was sending it onto the United States. And so some of those numbers aren't quite as drastic as they first appear.